It was supposed to be the most ordinary day. A quiet Sunday morning. The congregation gathered as they always did. The small rural town was used to routines. Life moved slowly there, measured by the chime of church bells and the familiar footsteps of those they trusted. Among them was Pastor Elijah Mercer, a man known for his kindness, humility, and his unwavering dedication to the flock he served. That morning, like so many before, he set out to deliver communion to a few elderly members who were too frail to attend the service in person. A simple task, a familiar route, and then he vanished. No sign, no trace. His car remained parked near the forest's edge where his route began. His Bible lay open on the passenger seat. The communion tray, still intact, sat untouched. But Elijah was gone, as though the woods had simply taken him. The community was shattered. Search teams combed every inch of the surrounding area for weeks. Helicopters, dogs, dozens of volunteers, all searching for a man who had walked that path hundreds of times. And yet, he was never seen again. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Theories flooded in, wild animals, an accident, even foul play. But nothing made sense. No broken branches, no torn clothing, no blood, just absence. The forest where he disappeared became a wound in the town's memory, a place parents warned their children never to wander near. And over time, like all wounds that refused to heal, it became scar tissue, a haunting mystery that quietly became part of the town's identity. Until, 25 years later, something changed. A group of hikers, lost and disoriented during a late autumn storm, stumbled upon something strange. Beneath a rotted pile of branches, tucked between stones and moss, they found an old, weathered leather pouch. Inside was a map, hand-drawn, faded, but unmistakably real. And on that map was Pastor Elijah's handwriting, his route marked clearly, along with something else. Strange symbols, arrows that led nowhere, circles drawn around places that didn't exist on any other map. News of the discovery spread like wildfire, because now, the question that had haunted the town for a quarter of a century wasn't just what happened to Pastor Elijah. It became something far more unsettling. What did he see out there? And even more terrifying, why did he mark places on that map that were never supposed to exist? The moment the hikers pulled that leather pouch from under damp branches, the forest took on a different aura. No longer just trees and shadows, but something alive, almost aware that its secret had been disturbed. They unfurled the fragile map under the dim glow of their headlamps. Hand-drawn paths snaked across the page, but what unsettled them most were the symbols. Hand-inked spirals, triangles, and crosses scattered away from the known trail. These weren't landmarks. They were signposts to something else. The leather felt warm in their hands, as if it carried the echo of Pastor Elijah's heartbeat. Within hours, local news had picked up the story. Reporters arrived with cameras, asking pointed questions. How far off the beaten path did you find it? Did you feel anything uncanny? But the hikers, all of them hardened outdoors folk, spoke only of a chill, not from wind, but from knowing. It felt like the forest was awake. The reporters left with footage of trembling hands, not breaking news, but enough to stir curiosity and fear. Meanwhile, a few of the town's elder residents, those who had known Pastor Elijah personally, tracked down the hikers. When confronted with the map, their eyes welled with tears. He drew this, one whispered, touching a faded arrow. He believed he found something, and in that moment, a memory returned to them. The day he disappeared, he had told his wife he felt pulled deeper into the forest, as though he had suddenly heard a voice beyond the wind. Those memories, buried for 25 years, broke open all at once. Reconstruction efforts began. Search parties, led by Elijah's niece, combed through the woods near the marked spots. They found trampled vegetation, fresh footprints in places no one walked. Even an old pocket watch, engraved with the date of Elijah's disappearance, half buried under pine needles. Every find sent local imagination spinning. This was no longer about a simple disappearance. It was about something larger, something someone had chosen to follow. Whether out of devotion or desperation, no one yet knew. At the heart of the mystery lay that map. Not just its existence, but its purpose. Elijah had been a man of faith, steady, unshakable, but here were scars against his quiet certainty. Why would he scatter those symbols through the forest unless he believed there was something there, something this world could not neatly explain? And more quietly terrifying, perhaps, was he trying to lead others there too? That question rattled through everyone's bones, refusing to let go. As the search expanded, volunteers discovered more clues, scraps of Elijah's notes, weather-beaten but still legible, shoved under tree roots, pressed into crevices. One phrase kept recurring: step beyond the known. No explanation, no context, just an instruction that struck like a command. Another read, I'm not lost. I'm between. What was he between? Was he seeking solace or something else? Every fragment widened the gap between his identity as a trusted pastor and the man who marked something else into the wild. Meanwhile, experts in cartography examined the map. They confirmed the symbols didn't match any official trail or survey. Some resembled ancient runes. Others looked like spiritual sigils. A few scholars speculated that Elijah had encountered a folk ritual site, maybe pagan, maybe older, something hidden beneath layers of law and theology. None of it could be proven, but it raised a chilling possibility. Had Elijah been chasing a doorway? With each passing day, the townspeople wrestled with their faith. The church held meetings, open to the public. Some demanded Elijah be remembered as a hero, someone who walked into the unknown out of bravery. Others whispered he had fallen prey to cultish ideas or had lost his mind. But the deeper questions remained. What had he encountered? And was the forest still holding its breath, waiting? As autumn's golden light waned into pale winter, the searchers gathered at a clearing pinpointed on the map. There, deep in the woods, they found strange carvings on stone, spirals entwining with crosses. The air there hummed, not literally, but psychologically, as if every footstep pressed against something fragile and ancient. The hush of the forest was no longer peaceful. It demanded silence, as though everyone who set foot there had agreed, unconsciously, to stop speaking. That night, one of the searchers, Elijah's niece Rachel, couldn't sleep. She opened the pouch. Her fingers trembled over the damp leather. She traced the final marking on the map, a lone X, far removed from all logical paths. Beneath it, in faded ink, here lies the way forward. Her breath caught. It was more than directions. It was a dare. And more than that, a promise or a threat. What did it mean when the path forward lies beneath our feet, not before them? The following morning, Rachel gathered a small group, just 4 people, all of them close enough to Elijah to remember his voice, his laugh, the way he'd clasp your hands in prayer with absolute certainty. This wasn't an official search party anymore. It was something else, something quieter, something heavier. Each of them carried a copy of the map now, their fingers tracing the path toward that lone X in the margins. They didn't speak much as they walked. Words fell wrong, as though the forest itself had ears, and speaking might wake something best left undisturbed. Hours passed. The deeper they went, the less familiar the forest became. The trees grew thicker, but not in the way nature intends. Branches twisted toward each other unnaturally, forming archways that didn't feel random. Roots crossed like barriers, as though the earth itself was deciding who could pass. There was no sound of birds, no rustling of animals, just footsteps and breath. And beneath it all a hum, not heard but felt, a vibration under their skin, deep in the chest, as if the ground was breathing. Then, without warning, the forest opened. A clearing, but not the soft kind where sunlight filters through. This place was wrong. A perfect circle, no trees, no undergrowth. At the center, a depression in the earth. Not a hole, not a pit, just absence. An emptiness where something should have been. Rachel stepped forward, her boots sinking half an inch into softer ground, as though the earth had been disturbed recently. But there were no footprints, no markings, only the trembling weight of something missing. One of the group, an older man named Samuel who'd been Elijah's closest friend, knelt and ran his fingers through the soil. His voice was barely more than breath. This isn't erosion. Something was taken from here. His words sent a chill through the group. Because if something was taken, what was it? Or worse, who? And why had Elijah marked this spot? Did he stand here once, staring into this emptiness, feeling the same wrongness pressing against his ribs like invisible hands? As they stood in the stillness, Rachel pulled out Elijah's note again. Her eyes scanned the faded ink. One line near the X was barely legible, smeared with what looked like water, or maybe something else. But under the right light, the words emerged. There's no going forward until you go under. The message hit like a punch. Everyone turned instinctively toward the depression in the center of the clearing. Because suddenly, the question wasn't what did Elijah find here. It was where does it lead now? For a long moment, no one moved. The weight of that single, terrifying line, until you go under, seemed to rewrite the air itself. Samuel circled the depression slowly, scanning the perimeter. The ground was soft, but not natural. The way it compressed beneath their feet felt deliberate, like something hollow lay just beneath the surface, something thin-skinned, waiting to be broken, or perhaps opened. Rachel crouched, pressing her hand flat against the earth. Cold, almost unnaturally so, like the chill of a cellar that hadn't been opened in decades. Then, beneath her palm, the faintest tremor, a pulse, not seismic, not the shift of tectonic plates, something closer, deeper, the kind of movement that feels like breathing. She jerked her hand back, but the others had felt it too. Their eyes met in unspoken agreement. Whatever lay beneath them was not asleep. Not fully. Or maybe it had never been asleep at all. Samuel grabbed a small hand shovel for his pack. He glanced at the others once, a silent question, and when none of them stepped back, he pressed the blade into the soil. The sound that followed was wrong. Not the muffled crunch of dirt, but a hollow thunk, like metal against wood. Everyone froze. No one breathed. Samuel scraped away another layer, revealing boards. Rotten and old, but unmistakably shaped by human hands. A hatch. A door. Buried beneath decades of earth and silence. Rachel's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Her father used to say, God doesn't put doors where he doesn't expect you to knock. But this didn't feel like a door from God. This felt like something else, a barrier built not to invite, but to contain. Samuel cleared more dirt until the edges were visible. There was no handle, no hinges on this side, just a square, framed tightly, as if someone had never intended it to be opened again. And yet, as if on cue, a sudden gust of wind cut through the clearing. Sharp, bitter, it whistled through the trees, shaking the branches, sending leaves spinning like flocks of startled birds. And in that breath of wind, a sound, so faint, so brief, they almost convinced themselves it wasn't real. But it was. A voice. Fragmented. Help. Still. Here. It came from below. Muffled by earth. Warped by time. But undeniable. And as the final syllable faded into the hollow air, every pair of eyes locked onto that wooden hatch. And the terror that maybe, just maybe, someone or something was still waiting beneath it. Silence fell heavier than any sound ever could. No one dared to move. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Because that voice, that broken, time-warped whisper, wasn't just a sound carried by the wind. It was a presence, a confirmation. Something was down there, or had been, or still was. Rachel's hands trembled as she pressed her fingers against the rotting edge of the hatch. The wood was cold. Not the natural cold of buried timber, but the kind of cold that seeps from places where sunlight, and perhaps time itself, never reaches. Samuel knelt beside her, his breath shaky but resolute. We can't just leave it, he whispered. But even as the words left his lips, doubt gnawed at the edges of his voice. What if it was never meant to be opened? What if this wasn't a door, but a lid? A seal? A boundary someone, maybe even Elijah himself, had marked not to be crossed, but to be respected? Yet here they were, decades later, standing on top of it, the weight of every decision pressing against their ribs. Rachel's fingers traced the edge until they found a gap, thin, splintered like something once tried to force it shut, or force it open. Her throat tightened. Memories of her uncle flooded in. His laughter, his quiet prayers, his certainty that faith could weather anything. And yet, he had drawn this. Marked it, sought it. What had he seen here? What had made him step beyond the boundary of the known? willing to vanish from the world above. The group exchanged one last glance, no words needed. Then Samuel wedged the tip of his shovel into the gap and pressed down. For a moment, nothing happened. The wood groaned but held. And then, with a cracking sigh, as though the earth itself resisted, the hatch shifted. A thin line of blackness appeared. Not shadow, not simply dark, but a black that swallowed light. A void that wasn't absence, but presence in its purest, most suffocating form. The smell hit them first. Not rot, not death, but age. The overwhelming scent of something sealed off from time itself. Rachel gripped the edge, leaned forward, and aimed her flashlight into the opening. The beam disappeared after only a few feet, swallowed by the suffocating dark. But just before the light fractured completely, it caught something. A shape, a surface, wood, stairs, leading down, and painted on the first step, in faded white brushstrokes, were 3 simple words: no turning back. No one spoke. The air around them felt thinner now, as though the simple act of opening the hatch had altered something fundamental, not just in the forest, but in the fabric of reality itself. The ground beneath their feet, moments ago solid, felt unstable, not crumbling, not fragile, but wrong, as though the very earth had tolerated their presence only as long as the seal remained closed. And now that it was open, it was watching, listening, waiting. Rachel's breath came in shallow gasps. Her fingers gripped the frame of the hatch so tightly her knuckles turned white. The words on the stairs, no turning back, burned in her mind like an echo of someone else's final choice. Her uncle's choice. Elijah had stepped here, had seen this, had felt this same tremor of dread hollowing his chest. And yet, he went down anyway. What did he see? What did he hear? And why was there never a map to get back out? Samuel tested the top step with one foot. It held. The wood creaked, but not from rot, from tension, from age, from being left untouched for too long. He flicked on his flashlight and aimed it downward. The beam fractured after only a few feet. The dark below wasn't just shadow. It was the kind of darkness that feels crowded, full, dense. The kind of dark that feels like if you listen close enough, you'll hear breathing. Not yours. Something else's. From behind, one of the others whispered, "We don't have to do this. We can close it. Pretend we never found it." But even as the words left their lips, they knew it was a lie. The hatch had been opened. The boundary had been broken. Whatever balance the earth had held, whatever agreement was once made, was now undone. Whether by accident, by fate, or by design, they had crossed the threshold already. The question now wasn't if they would go down. It was whether they could afford not to. Rachel swallowed hard, steadied her breath, and swung her legs over the edge. Her boots touched the first step, the one marked with those 3 words. And as her weight settled onto the stair, a tremor echoed downward. Not like an earthquake, not like a shift in the ground, but like something below felt her arrival. Noticed it, marked it, and then, from somewhere in that suffocating dark, a single sound rose. A whisper, too faint to understand, too clear to ignore. Still waiting, the whisper slid across Rachel's skin like cold breath, prickling every nerve as though the air itself carried fingers that traced her spine. She gripped the side of the hatch tighter, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the forest above. Her flashlight flickered once, just once, but the beam refused to penetrate more than a few feet of the suffocating darkness. Behind her, Samuel descended the step beside her. His face, usually steady with calm, was hollowed now. Not fear exactly. Something heavier. Something closer to recognition. The stairs groaned as more weight shifted onto them. But the sound wasn't the natural strain of wood. It was deeper, resonant, as if the stairs weren't groaning, but speaking. Each creak felt deliberate, like something below was taking attendance, counting each soul that crossed the threshold. As they continued, step by step, the light behind them faded. The open hatch above narrowed, the square of daylight shrinking until it felt impossibly distant, until it became just another memory of the world they were leaving behind. About 10 steps down, the walls changed. What had been rough earth and stone transitioned into something built. Smooth surfaces, edges shaped by hands. Timber first, then stonework, Archways, carved beams, walls covered in strange patterns. Spirals crossed with arrows. Symbols that mirror the ones on Elijah's map. But here, they weren't drawn in ink. They were etched into the structure itself. Permanent, deliberate, warnings, or perhaps instructions. Samuel's flashlight caught something ahead. A shape. A doorway. Open. Its frame heavy with beams so old they were silvered, petrified by time. Hanging from the top beam, a chain. No lock. Just a single, rusted chain swaying slightly. Not from wind. There was no wind down here. It moved like something had passed through it just moments before. Something unseen. Or waiting to be seen. Rachel stepped forward, breath shallow, throat dry. On the stone beside the doorway, carved deep, were words almost too faded to read. She brushed her fingers over them. The letters were rough, uneven, carved by hand, not chisel. He who seeks the way, leaves the world behind. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Because beneath those words was something else. A mark scorched into the stone. A handprint. Small, delicate, charred black against gray. As though someone had pressed their palm there, and simply never pulled it back. Rachel froze, her fingertips hovering just inches from that scorched handprint. The sight of it stirred something primal. Not fear exactly, but the raw instinct that every cell in her body recognized as danger. Not the kind you run from. The kind that means there is nowhere to run. The kind of danger that belongs to places not meant for the living. The air tasted different here. Metallic. Old. Almost like breathing something dead. Not rotting, but long forgotten. Samuel stepped beside her, squinting at the handprint, then scanning the doorway. His voice came out lower than a whisper. This isn't Elijah's mark. The certainty in his tone was chilling. This is older. Much older. The others caught up, their flashlights sweeping wildly across the stonework, across the floor, onto the opposite wall, and froze. Because the wall wasn't just stone. It was covered in drawings. Hundreds of them. Overlapping. Etched, scratched, burned. All variations of the same figure. A man. Alone. Walking into the woods. Again. And again. And again. Some of the carvings showed him standing before an arch. Others showed him beneath spirals. And in the final panels, always the same, the figure was simply gone. Erased. Faded into the stone itself, as though he had stepped beyond the final frame of reality. Beneath a few of the carvings were dates. Not all legible, but some were unmistakable. 1922, 1878, 1754, and the oldest, 1631. Rachel staggered back. This isn't new, she whispered. Her breath trembled. This has been happening for centuries. Her voice faltered as she turned back toward the passage beyond the door. Her flashlight beam trembled against a narrow corridor stretching further down, swallowed again by that same oppressive darkness. And on the floor, directly at the corridor's mouth, was something new, something impossible. A Bible, leather-bound, faded, torn, but on the inside cover, written in shaky, familiar handwriting, Elijah Mercer. She dropped to her knees, flipping it open with trembling hands. Pages stained, edges curled, scrawled between verses, in frantic handwriting, were desperate notes. The way narrows. The voices are closer now. There's something beyond the third door. If anyone finds this, the writing cut off in a jagged slash. Her hands trembled as she gripped the book tighter. A sick realization bloomed in her chest. Elijah had come this far. He had written this. But he had never written how to get back. The weight of the discovery pressed down on Rachel like the air itself had thickened, made of something heavier than oxygen, something closer to dread. Her fingers trembled as they traced Elijah's last frantic line. The ink smudged as though his hand had jerked violently when he stopped writing. If anyone finds this, and nothing else. No farewell, no explanation, only an abrupt end, like something had reached him before he could finish. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the stone itself held its breath, waiting to see what they would do next. Samuel crouched beside her, his eyes fixed not on the Bible, but on the dark corridor beyond. His voice broke the silence, rough, strained. If he made it this far and never made it back, his sentence died in his throat. No one needed him to finish. The implication hung in the air like a blade suspended over all of them. The others shifted nervously behind, casting uneasy glances toward the path ahead, each of them silently wrestling with the same realization. This was no longer about finding answers. This was about finding remains, or maybe worse, finding what took him. The flashlight beams jittered as they stepped toward the corridor. The air grew colder, but not in the way basements or caves grow cold. This was a living cold. It pressed against skin like breath, like fingers, like something unseen brushing, just close enough to remind them they were not alone. The corridor walls narrowed unnaturally, as though the stone itself was folding inward, squeezing space tighter with every step. Symbols scratched into the walls grew denser here, spirals within spirals, eyes without faces, hands reaching toward nothing. Then, the smell. It hit like a physical blow. Not decay, not mildew, but something far worse. Electric, metallic, wrong. A scent that had no place in nature, like scorched metal and old blood, mixed with the sterile sting of something not meant to be breathed. Rachel gagged, covering her mouth, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Samuel stumbled, muttering, What is that?" But no one answered, because even asking the question felt like giving it too much power, like acknowledging it might let it answer back. Up ahead, the corridor widened abruptly, opening into a chamber. Their lights darted across rough stone walls, jagged like broken teeth. And there, at the center, half collapsed, half buried beneath centuries of dust, stood a door. Not wood, not stone, iron, rusted, bolted, sealed shut from the outside with thick, heavy chains, and painted across it, in letters smeared, faded, and scratched beyond recognition, was a single word that made every muscle in Rachel's body lock in place. Forgotten. And beneath it, scrawled smaller, Messier, frantic, not locked to keep them out, locked to keep what's in from ever coming back. For several heartbeats, none of them moved. The door seemed to pulse in the darkness, not literally, but in perception, as if their mere presence had woken something on the other side. The chains that bound it weren't just restraints. They were warnings made tangible. Their rust wasn't the slow decay of metal against time. It was the byproduct of something older, a corrosion born from purpose. Samuel stepped closer, tilting his flashlight along the edges, his lips barely moving. These weren't put here in panic. These were put here, knowing. Rachel swallowed the bile rising in her throat, her hands clenching the Bible, as though it alone might shield her from whatever horror stood beyond that threshold. Her eyes flicked to the bottom corner of the iron slab, where something shimmered, scratches worn deep by what looked like fingernails. Not once, not frantically, but repeatedly, over decades, centuries, maybe, a message or a plea, a mark left by someone who had tried and failed to get out. Then Samuel noticed it, a gap, small, narrow, but real. At the bottom right corner of the door, where the iron had buckled, a sliver of space no wider than a hand had formed. Air moved there, not quickly but steady, a constant exhale from the other side. Cold, damp, and beneath that cold a whisper. Not words this time. A sound, breathing, slow, rhythmic, not panicked, not human, but aware, as though whatever was behind that door knew they were there, and was waiting. The others began to panic. One of them stepped back, muttering, "We shouldn't be here. We were never supposed to be here." Another spun around, flashlight beam jittering wildly against the jagged walls. "We need to go. We need to close the hatch. Bury it again. Forget this. All of it." Just like they meant to. But even as the words spilled out, the futility of them was clear, because something had already noticed them. And you can't unring a bell once it's been struck. Rachel stepped forward despite herself, drawn as much by terror as by the terrible gravity of the unknown. Her fingers hovered near the chains, rust flaking, metal trembling ever so slightly. And there, directly above the chains, barely visible in the flicker of her failing flashlight, were 4 words etched into the iron itself. Not painted, not scratched, etched. "The way is open." Her breath caught in her throat. Not because the door was ajar, it wasn't, but because the meaning was far more horrifying. The lock wasn't physical. It never had been. It was choice. It was presence. It was willingness to look. The realization hit with the force of something primal, something that bypassed reason entirely and spoke directly to the animal part of the brain that understands danger not as a concept, but as an undeniable fact. The way is open. It wasn't a declaration about the door's physical state. It was a statement about intent, about consent, about the simple, brutal truth that sometimes the only key is someone willing to step through. And now, the air itself felt like a question, hanging, pressing. Who? Rachel's hands trembled as she traced the lettering. Her breath fogged against the cold iron, leaving temporary ghosts of herself on the metal. Behind her, Samuel's voice was low, barely audible. Elijah, read this. He stood here. He saw this exact thing. The sentence fractured under its own weight. Because if Elijah had seen this, and if Elijah had never come back, what had he chosen? Or worse, what had he failed to resist? The whispering grew louder. Not voices, exactly, but pressure that sounded like memory, like words just below the surface of hearing. Shapes formed in the periphery of their flashlight beams. Not objects, but suggestions of figures. Tall, still, observing. Shadows that didn't flicker when the light moved, as though they existed not in this space, but in the outline of something deeper, something underneath reality. Samuel stepped back, gripping the strap of his backpack, so hard his knuckles whitened. We need to decide now. Right now. His voice trembled between panic and grim certainty. If we open this, there's no going back. This isn't a door to answers. This is a door to wherever Elijah went. To whatever this is. His eyes flicked toward the others, but most had already started backing away, their instincts screaming what their minds refused to say. Leave. Now, while you still can. But Rachel didn't move. Her grip tightened around the Bible still clutched to her chest, her thumb brushing against the cracked leather. Inside, the final line Elijah had written echoed louder than the sound of her own breathing. If anyone finds this, it wasn't just a warning. It wasn't a plea. It was a hand extended into the dark. A message passed forward to whoever was willing to finish what he started, or maybe what he failed to finish. Her gaze dropped to the bottom of the door, to the sliver of space where cold breath drifted out like smoke. And from beyond it, a new whisper. Closer now. Sharper. Choose. Rachel stood frozen, every instinct in her body screaming to run, but the weight of the moment nailed her in place. The word choose wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a threat. It was a summons. An ancient contract written not in ink, but in presence, in proximity. As though just being here, just opening the hatch, had already signed her name on some invisible line. Behind her, the group was unraveling. One man stumbled back against the wall, muttering prayers under his breath. Another sobbed quietly, his face buried in his hands. But Samuel stayed. Despite the tremor in his jaw, despite the pale dread in his eyes, he stayed. His hand landed on Rachel's shoulder, not to stop her, but to ground himself. His voice came out raw. If we walk away now, do you think it ends? Do you think this place, this thing forgets us? The silence that followed that question was louder than any scream could ever be. They both knew the answer. No, it never forgets. The door's surface trembled, just slightly, not from any force on their side, but from something brushing against it from the other side. A rhythmic thud, like slow, deliberate footsteps. Not heavy, not rushed, just approaching. Closer, closer. With each step, the gap at the bottom of the door exhaled sharper, colder, more pungent bursts of air. Not the smell of death, but something worse. The smell of emptiness. The scent of something so devoid of life that it mocked the concept of being. And then a sound. Different this time. Not a whisper, not a breath, but a knock. A single, hollow, calculated knock against the inside of the door. Wood against metal. Bone against iron. Impossible to tell. But it reverberated through the stone, through their bones, through every part of them that understood what should and should not exist. A knock that said, I know you're there. Rachel's vision blurred as a wave of cold swept over her, pulling tears from her eyes, freezing them at the corners. Her fingers hovered over the chains. Her mouth opened, but no words came, only breath. Her mind screamed with 1,000 questions, but only one mattered now. If Elijah stood here, If Elijah heard this same knock, was it courage that made him open the door? Or was it despair? And in that single, terrible heartbeat, the knock came again. Louder, closer, demanding. Choose. The second knock wasn't just louder. It was heavier, more deliberate. It reverberated not only through the walls but deep into the marrow of their bones, as though the sound itself was being pushed into them. Rachel gasped, her grip on the chain tightening involuntarily. Her legs trembled, threatening to buckle beneath her. Somewhere deep inside, her instinct screamed the kind of primal warning that humanity was never meant to ignore. This isn't just a door. This is a line, and it's asking if you're ready to step over it. Samuel's voice was barely more than a broken whisper now. Rachel, we don't have to do this. But even as he said it, he knew. They both did. The choice had already started the moment they found the map. The moment they stepped through the hatch. The moment the earth let them find this place. The door wasn't just waiting for a decision. It was bait. A lure cast out into the world for anyone foolish or desperate enough to follow the thread to its bitter, final knot. The air shifted again. The breathing from beyond the door grew louder, heavier, ragged, as though whatever was on the other side had moved closer. Much closer. So close that Rachel could swear she heard skin moving over bone. Fingertips tracing the iron from the other side. It wasn't trying to break through. It didn't need to. It was waiting. Waiting for someone on this side to make the mistake. Waiting for the permission that had always been the true lock. Then came the third knock. This one wasn't a knock at all. It was a strike. A violent, echoing crack that sent dust raining from the ceiling and chains rattling violently against the iron. Everyone staggered back instinctively. Everyone but Rachel. Her feet remained rooted to the floor, as though something beyond her had locked them in place. Her heart raced so violently she thought it might burst. But beneath the panic, something else bloomed. Something even more terrifying. Curiosity. Her breath hitched. Her fingers slowly wrapped around the thickest link in the chain. Her thumb brushed the clasp. A simple iron loop, rusted but still functional. And then she realized something that made her blood turn colder than the air around her. The clasp wasn't locked. It never had been. It hung loosely, like it had always been ready for the simplest, most devastating movement. A pull. One pull. That's all it would take. And somewhere, just inches away on the other side of that suffocating iron, something breathed in, as though it knew she was about to decide. Rachel's hand trembled, suspended in that final, awful moment of choice. Her fingertips hovered over the rusted clasp like it was made of fire. The air was so thick now it felt like she was breathing through cloth soaked in ice water. Behind her, Samuel's voice cracked apart into fragments. Rachel, please. His words didn't sound like commands or warnings anymore. They sounded like grief, like the way someone pleads with a person about to step in front of a moving train, not because they can stop them, but because they can't bear to watch. Her eyes darted to the message carved above the chains. The way is open. And in that moment, the horrifying clarity of it struck her full force. The door was never locked. It was never meant to be locked. This wasn't a barrier. It was an invitation. Or worse, a trap disguised as a choice. A test that only ends one way. Not in triumph, but in disappearance. The same choice Elijah had faced. The same choice reflected in the dozens, maybe hundreds of etched figures they had seen along the corridor. Suddenly, another sound. Not a knock this time. Not breathing, but scratching. Light at first, then more frantic. Fingernails? Bone. Something was dragging itself across the metal from the other side. It started at the top and worked downward, slow, deliberate, like tracing the outline of a shape, like mapping where the weakest point might be. The sound was so precise it felt like it was meant for their ears, meant to make sure they heard it. Rachel's hand gripped the clasp tighter. Her chest rose and fell in broken gasps. Her mind flashed to Elijah, to the empty communion tray left behind, to the map hidden beneath the moss, to the note left half-finished. If anyone finds this, her teeth clenched. Her mouth formed silent words she couldn't say out loud. And then, her thumb pressed against the clasp. Metal squealed. It shifted, a fraction of an inch. The scratching stopped, instantly, as though the sound itself had been a lure and the bait had just taken the hook. From beyond the door, in the kind of voice that wasn't heard but felt, came a single word, sharp, distorted, heavy with something older than language itself. A word that burrowed under the skin, into the mind, into the soul. Good. That single word, good, didn't echo like sound. It rippled like a shockwave, as though it had bypassed her ears entirely and spoken straight into the marrow of her bones. The moment it landed, the air tightened further, squeezing their lungs, squeezing their hearts. Rachel stumbled back instinctively, her fingers flying off the clasp as though it had burned her. But the damage was done. The chain rattled violently, not from her, but from something pulling back on the other side. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. He staggered against the wall, wide-eyed, as his gaze locked on the bottom of the door. The gap, once just a hairline sliver, widened. Not mechanically, not like hinges moving. The iron itself seemed to flex, bend, as though the material was never truly solid, as though the door was alive, breathing, responding. From that widening seam, a draft of air surged outward, icy, fetid, laced with something far worse than rot. A smell like emptiness given form. A smell that wasn't supposed to exist in the world above. And with it movement. Something shifted behind the door. Heavy, wet, sliding over stone. Not frantic, not wild, but deliberate, controlled, intelligent. It moved like something that understood the mechanics of fear. Like something that had rehearsed this moment countless times with others who had stood exactly where Rachel stood now, hands trembling, deciding. The chains quivered, the door trembled, and from that growing gap, a sound spilled out that wasn't quite a voice and wasn't quite anything else. A hum, a resonance, almost a laughter. One of the others couldn't take it anymore. He bolted, sprinting back up the corridor, flashlight beam slashing wildly across the walls as he ran. His screams faded into echoes swallowed by the tunnel. But no one followed. No one even turned to watch. Because every fiber of their being told them the same terrible truth. If you turn your back on this, it follows. Whether physically, spiritually, or worse, they didn't know. But the feeling was undeniable. And then, from that darkness beyond the door, another voice. A different one this time. Familiar, broken, ragged. A whisper carried on the stinking breath of that hollow void. A voice Rachel hadn't heard in 25 years, but would have known anywhere. Rachel, please, help me. Her blood turned to ice. Her vision blurred. Her knees almost gave out, because there was no mistaking it. It was Elijah, her uncle, his voice, his desperation. But the question wasn't if he was alive. The real question, the one that hollowed her out completely, was what was left of him now. Rachel's heart slammed so violently against her ribs that for a moment she couldn't breathe. Her uncle's voice, impossibly familiar, heartbreakingly real, slithered through that widening seam beneath the door. It wasn't like a memory. It wasn't like something imagined. It was present, tangible, here. But layered beneath the desperate plea, something else lurked. A distortion, like an echo that doesn't quite match the original sound. A warping, subtle, but undeniable. As if whatever was using Elijah's voice wasn't entirely him anymore. Samuel's hand clamped onto Rachel's shoulder, pulling her back so hard she almost fell. No, 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 no. His whisper was panicked, frantic, like a man realizing he'd stepped too close to the edge of a cliff and felt the ground give way. It's not him. It's not him anymore. Rachel, listen to me. It's using him. It's using him to pull you in. His eyes glistened with the kind of dread that only comes from understanding something too late. But Rachel couldn't move, couldn't tear her eyes away from that black seam, wider now, as if the very material of the door was softening, relaxing, inviting. Her uncle's voice came again, more frantic this time. Rachel, it hurts. I'm cold, it's so dark here. Don't leave me here, please. Her vision blurred with tears. Her grip loosened on the Bible, fingers trembling as the weight of 25 years of guilt, unanswered questions, and unbearable love crushed her in place. Uncle, she whispered, voice cracking, barely audible. From the darkness, something shifted, a scraping sound, bone against stone, flesh against iron. Something moving closer to the gap, closer to the world, closer to her. Then, Just as her lips parted to speak again, a hand slid through the gap. Not fast, not aggressive. Slow, deliberate. Pale skin stretched too thin over impossibly long fingers. Fingernails cracked, blackened. The wrist was wrong, bent, twisted at angles no human bone could sustain. But the hand still reached forward, palm up, waiting. Rachel's knees buckled. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Her mind screamed to run, to slam the clasp shut, to flee back into the safety of ignorance. But her heart heard Elijah. And that's when the hand twitched. Once, twice, and then the fingers curled inward. Not beckoning, not pleading, signaling. From beyond the door, the voice came one final time, clearer, sharper, more distorted than ever before. You're already halfway here. Rachel. Samuel yanked Rachel backward, just as her trembling fingers unconsciously reached toward the outstretched hand. The force of his pull snapped her out of the trance, but only barely. Her legs buckled, sending her sprawling to the ground, gasping like someone pulled from underwater. The hand remained, fingers twitching in slow, rhythmic pulses. Not desperate, not struggling, certain, as though whatever was on the other side had done this before. Many times. Enough to know that panic eventually fades, and curiosity always takes its place. The door groaned again, not from pressure, but from breathing. It pulsed inward, exhaling that same cold, fetid draft that now filled the entire chamber. And beneath the stink of mold, iron, and something older than rot was a new smell. Something sweet, sickly, familiar in the most horrifying way. The smell of blood that's dried, and then gotten wet again. Samuel staggered to the wall, pounding his fist against the stone as if grounding himself in the real, solid world. But the world here was no longer solid. It was pliable, softening like the door itself. The chain trembled on the ground now, the clasp fully open, dropped, forgotten, or perhaps released. Rachel sat frozen, tears blurring her vision, as her uncle's voice came again. Quieter, closer. I waited so long, so long. Rachel, you found the map. You know where it leads? Finish it. His voice cracked, trailing into a garbled distortion, like a tape unraveling. Then, the hand slid further through the gap. The arm followed. The skin, gray, stretched, paper-thin, glistened where it should not have. Where light touched it, shadows didn't fall naturally. They bent, curved, recoiled, like the darkness itself was repulsed by the thing pretending to be flesh. The joints bulged in all the wrong places. The bones were wrong. Too long, too sharp, too hungry. Rachel's head shook violently. Her hands clamped over her ears, as if that could block out the words still clawing into her mind. Come closer, Rachel. It's better here. No pain here, no time. Just stay. And then a sound joined it, low, wet, a laugh. But it wasn't Elijah. Or rather, it wasn't only Elijah. It was layered, twisted, as if 100 mouths were speaking through one broken voice. Samuel snapped. His trembling hands darted toward his pack, fingers fumbling for something, anything. He yanked out a small camping hatchet, gripping it like it was the only tether to sanity he had left. Back! Get back! He shouted, not just to the thing at the door but to Rachel. His voice was ragged, barely holding itself together. The blade trembled in his hands. It was a laughable weapon in the face of this, but it was all he had. The creature, if it could still be called that, paused. The hand hovered, twitching. Then slowly, it retracted, joint popping audibly as the wrist bent back in an unnatural angle, folding like a marionette's broken limb. But the voice didn't stop. It's always the same. Always the same. They run, they forget. But it waits, and waits. The chain slithered across the floor like something alive, rattling as though caught in some unseen breath. Then the walls shifted, not physically, but perceptually. The symbols etched into the stone seemed to twist, move, reshaping themselves as if reacting to the retreat of the hand. Arrows that once pointed toward the door now spun toward the corridor behind them. Spirals flattened into lines. Crosses stretched into pathways. And with horrifying clarity, Samuel realized, it's not done with us. It's showing us something else. Rachel staggered to her feet, her hands still pressed against her ears. Her breathing was ragged, but her eyes now held something different. Not curiosity, not terror, but realization. It's a map. Samuel. The markings, they're changing. It's showing us where it wants us to go now. Her voice was hollow, broken, barely recognizable as her own. And she was right, because the wall ahead, the one that had once appeared solid, cracked. A seam split down the center of the wall. Dust fell in soft clouds. A grinding moan of stone against stone echoed through the chamber. A door. Another door. But not iron. Not locked. Open. Waiting. And painted crudely across the frame, in a red so faded it was nearly brown, was one word. One single word. Deeper. The word deeper wasn't written. It was smeared. As though someone, or something, had dragged fingers through wet blood decades, maybe centuries ago. The stain had faded, but the message remained as loud as if it had been painted moments ago. Samuel staggered back a step, his eyes darting toward the open frame. There was no light beyond it. Not a sliver. Not a crack. Just void. A space that swallowed not just sight, but the very idea of sight. The air pouring from the new passage felt different. The cold wasn't natural. It wasn't like the chill of caves or winter air. It was sterile. Hollow. The absence of life itself. A vacuum where sound, warmth, and even time seemed to tremble at the threshold. Rachel stood staring, her chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. "It's not finished," she whispered. It was never about this door. The iron door, the hatch, they were never the destination. They were the invitation. The symbols shifted again, this time more violently. Scraping sounds filled the air as lines folded into spirals. Spirals bled into sigils that pulsed, bent, and rewrote themselves as if the walls were correcting the course. The crude handprints burned into the stone, familiar, desperate, began pointing, directing, all toward the gaping black of the newly revealed doorway. And then, the sound came back. A heartbeat. Slow. Heavy. Not theirs. Not human. Samuel gripped his hatchet tighter, his knuckles bone white. His voice broke. "Rachel, if we go through there, there's no map back." He was wrong. The Bible in Rachel's hand, once thought to be their clue, their compass, offered nothing past this point. The final page, stained and warped, bore no notes. No exit. Just one unfinished sentence from Elijah. "It goes deeper than I ever." A jagged line cut off the rest. Ink smeared. A hand dragged away mid-thought, or mid-scream. Rachel turned her eyes to Samuel. Her lips trembled. But then, with a steadying breath, she whispered, "He went through." Her fingers tightened around the Bible, as if it were the last tether to a world that still made sense. "He went through, Samuel. And if we came this far, maybe it was never about finding him. Maybe it's about finding out why he never came back." Her voice fractured at the edges, but she was already stepping forward, toward the door marked deeper, toward whatever waited beyond. The moment Rachel crossed the threshold, something shifted, not in the air, not in the earth, but in her. A weight settled in her bones. Her skin crawled as though thousands of unseen fingers pressed against her, testing, measuring. Samuel hesitated, a scream nearly caught in his throat, but he followed. He couldn't let her go in alone. His boots struck the ground beyond the doorway, and the sound died. Instantly, as though the very act of stepping inside stripped the noise from existence itself. The darkness wasn't just absence. It was substance. Their flashlights, once cutting through shadows, now barely illuminated a few inches ahead. The beams bent, as though struggling against something thick, something liquid. And within that suffocating black, walls began to take shape, close. Too close. Covered in grooves. In patterns. In shapes that shifted when the eye tried to focus. Some resembled skeletal hands. Others looked like mouths, frozen open. Rachel gripped Samuel's arm tightly, whispering as though louder words might awaken something waiting just beyond their reach. "Do you feel that?" Samuel nodded slowly, teeth clenched. "Yeah, like the floor is breathing." And it was. Beneath their boots, the ground rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. Not stone, not earth, not wood. Something else. Something living, or pretending to be. Then a head movement. Subtle, but undeniable. Something pale. Thin. A figure. Just standing there. Facing away. Still. Perfectly still. Shoulders hunched. Limbs dangling like they didn't quite belong to the body that wore them. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Samuel raised the hatchet in shaking hands. The figure twitched, once. Head tilting. Listening. It hadn't seen them yet. Or worse, it had. And was pretending it hadn't. Before either could speak, the figure moved. Not walking. Not stepping. Sliding. Smooth. Effortless. Its feet didn't lift. Its head cocked in an impossible angle. Bones crackling like wet branches. And then it whispered. Not a voice from lungs. Not sound from lips. But straight into their minds. You followed him, but he never left. You did. The voice fractured into dry laughter. You left, you left. The voice splintered through Rachel's skull, rattling against the fragile walls of sanity like shards of broken glass. Her knees buckled as the figure slid closer, its limbs dangling grotesquely as if the bones inside were too long, too sharp, forcing the skin to drape over them unnaturally. The face, if it could even be called that, remained turned away. Hair hung in thin, clumped strands, soaked in something dark. Its presence wasn't simply terrifying, it was wrong, as if reality itself bent just slightly around it, like it wasn't supposed to be here, or anywhere. Samuel raised his hatchet higher, his breath ragged, the muscles in his arms shaking under the weight of both the weapon and the primal dread rooting him in place. Stay back, he hissed, though his voice was hollow, stripped of authority. The figure twitched again, its head rolling halfway around, far too far for any living thing, vertebrae popping one by one in nauseating cracks. The jaw unhinged, slack, twitching at an angle, and for the first time, its eyes became visible. But there were no eyes, only pits, hollow, cavernous, deep enough to fall into. Then it spoke again, not with words carried on air, but directly through vibration, drilling into bone and marrow. He walked, he asked, he knocked just like you. The voice fractured, doubling, tripling, as though hundreds were speaking at once. And we answered. We always answer. We never say no. The laughter that followed was dry, broken, stitched together from the absence of sound itself. Rachel's hand flew to her ears, but it didn't help. You couldn't block out a voice that wasn't carried on sound waves. Samuel grabbed her arm, tugging her back, his voice cracking with panic. Rachel, look at the wall. Look at the wall. Her eyes darted sideways, snapping from the creature to the wall lining the corridor. Etched into the stone were carvings, rows of figures. People, hundreds of them, all facing toward a door, each one smaller than the last. Each one etched deeper into the wall, until the final figure wasn't carved at all. It was an absence, a hollow outline where the stone had been consumed. Samuel's voice cracked as realization punched through the panic. It's not showing us them, it's showing us us. And then, the figure lunged. Not running, not stepping. It snapped forward like a marionette yanked by invisible strings, its jaw distending, its hollow eye sockets glowing with an absence so violent it felt like the room itself tried to collapse. And as it rushed them, it screamed with a voice that wasn't rage, but triumph. You stay now. Instinct surged where reason failed. Samuel swung the hatchet, wild, desperate, aiming not for the creature, but for anything that wasn't it. The blade struck stone, sparking against the wall as the figure barreled forward with impossible speed. Rachel was yanked backward, both of them stumbling as they bolted toward the only path visible. A narrow passage splitting from the chamber, unmarked, unseen until now. The walls seemed to ripple, as if the stone itself resented their escape. The creature's voice pursued them, echoing inside their minds. No leaving, no leaving. You stay now. The laughter splintered again, reverberating like thousands of teeth clicking together. Faster, faster. Samuel dragged Rachel around a corner, just as something sharp, a hand, a limb, something not quite either, swiped past, slicing into the stone where their heads had been seconds before. The wall cracked. Dust filled the air. But they didn't stop. The passage narrowed further. So narrow Samuel's shoulders scraped both sides as he pulled Rachel behind him. The air thickened, not with dust, but with pressure. Breathing became harder, like the walls themselves were squeezing their lungs. Behind them, the sound shifted. The figure no longer screamed. It chanted, rhythmic, repetitive, words in no language, vowels stretched until they folded in on themselves. It wasn't meant to communicate. It was meant to erode. Suddenly, the floor dropped. Not fully. A steep slope, slick, as if something had worn it smooth over time, or over countless bodies sliding down unwillingly. Samuel's feet flew out from under him. Rachel tumbled after, both of them sliding into the dark, scraping skin against rock, hitting invisible shapes, ribs of the earth or something older. Down and down, momentum unstoppable, until the floor leveled and spat them into another chamber. Silence. Heavy. Pressing. Not relief. Anticipation. The walls here were smoother. Rounded. Breathing. No carvings. No symbols. Only one thing stood in the center. An arch monolithic. Black. Perfectly smooth. Leading not into another room, but into nothing. Pure, tangible blackness. A doorway into absence itself. And carved around the top of the arch, words far too clean, far too fresh. You found the way. No one leaves the way. For a moment, neither Rachel nor Samuel moved. They lay there gasping, trembling, trying to make sense of the impossible shape before them. The arch stood in complete contrast to everything else in this labyrinth of horror. Unlike the decaying walls and grotesque carvings, this structure was perfect, seamless. It wasn't made of stone. It wasn't metal. It was something else. A material so black it swallowed the light entirely, giving the illusion that it wasn't even there, just a hole punched through the fabric of the world. Samuel pushed himself upright first, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, his hands shaking uncontrollably. His voice broke through the silence, barely more than a whisper. "Rachel, what is this?" But, deep down, both of them knew the answer. This wasn't just a doorway. It was the doorway. The final point on Elijah's map. The destination every mark, every symbol, every voice had been leading them toward. Deeper wasn't a place. Deeper was this. The air grew heavier the longer they stared. Their chests tightened as if gravity itself was pulling toward the arch. Not like a magnet, not like force, but like will. Like the absence beyond the threshold was aware of them. Like it was leaning closer, stretching itself thin at the edges, preparing for something. Behind them, the faint clicking laughter of the creature from the previous chamber echoed once more, distant but persistent, as if it was watching from somewhere unseen, waiting to see if they would take the final step. Rachel staggered to her feet, wiping the blood from her temple. Her fingers clutched the Bible tighter than ever before, knuckles white. She looked at Samuel, her voice so fragile it was barely hers. This is where he went. Elijah. This is where he crossed. Her breath hitched. And this is why he never came back. Her words collapsed at the edges, crushed beneath the sheer weight of what stood before them. Then a sound. Not behind them. Not above. But within the arch. A pulse. A vibration. A breath. Except it wasn't pulling air in. It was pushing it out. And with that breath came a voice, so low it rattled the marrow inside their bones. No one finds a way. The way finds them. The blackness rippled. The surface of the void flexed, folded, as though a hand, a face, or something far beyond form pressed against it from the other side. Waiting, watching, inviting. The rippling surface convulsed once more, distorting not just visually, but physically. The air twisted with it, forcing Samuel to stagger backward as his equilibrium shattered. His vision warped. Rachel seemed to bend, her silhouette stretching sideways, and then snapping back as if space itself had hiccuped. The arch no longer looked like a doorway. It looked like a wound, a tear in the fabric of the world, something unfinished, something desperate to be filled. And then it began to whisper again, but not like the voice of the creature before. This wasn't something foreign. This wasn't something alien. This voice was familiar. Voices, plural, dozens, hundreds, overlapping, some frantic, some pleading, some calm, resigned. Rachel, Samuel, come through. Please, you have to see, you have to know. a voice sharp and clear-cut through the chorus. "Rachel, it's me. It's Elijah. Finish what I started." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes, burning as if the very air had turned acidic. Her grip tightened around the Bible, so hard it creaked beneath her fingers. But when she looked down, her stomach turned. The pages weren't blank. They weren't scriptures. The text was moving, shifting, letters folding over themselves, twisting into symbols, then collapsing into inky stains. As though the truth had become too heavy for words to bear. Samuel backed against the curved wall, panting, struggling to pull his eyes away from the swirling blackness. This thing doesn't just take people. Rachel, it eats reality. It rewrites it. His voice cracked on the last word, the horror in it making his entire body tremble. It's why nothing makes sense down here. Why the map kept changing. Why the walls move. It's not the place that shifts. It's us. From within the void, something began to press outward. A shape. Tall. Thin. Humanoid at first glance, but wrong. Wrong in ways the mind rejected. With joints bending where they shouldn't. Limbs tapering into points that didn't belong to flesh. Its surface wasn't skin. It was reflection. Like a living mirror of shadow, showing not the world around it, but everything it had already consumed. And as it pushed closer to the threshold, the whisper shifted into a declaration. Once seen, never unseen. Once entered, never leaves. The thing emerging from a void didn't step. It folded into reality. Limbs twisted into existence like paper, crumpling in reverse, unwinding into grotesque symmetry that the eye tried and failed to process. Its head tilted, or what should have been a head, smooth, featureless, save for the texture of shifting reflections. But what it reflected wasn't them. It wasn't a room. It was places, images, moments. A bedroom with peeling wallpaper. A kitchen flooded in moonlight. A pair of hands gripping a communion tray. A face, Elijah's face, screaming, warped, fractured into shards of memory stitched into the creature's skin. Samuel's breath broke into panicked gasps, his hands trembling so violently that he dropped the hatchet without realizing it. His eyes stayed glued to the surface of that thing. His own face stared back at him for a moment, wide-eyed, terrified, before melting into static, as though memory itself was deteriorating. "Rachel, this isn't a door. It's a mirror. It's a trap. It's every step we ever took to get here feeding it." His voice was barely human now, strangled by terror. Rachel took a staggering step backward, her hands trembling, the Bible now ice-cold in her grip. But even as fear swallowed her, part of her, the part that had carried her this far, couldn't look away. Her eyes burned as more images rippled across the thing's surface. A map drawn in shaky hands. Footsteps in mud. The hatch being sealed. A prayer whispered into emptiness. Elijah falling. Over and over. Falling into the dark. Falling through it. Then the figure spoke again, but this time the voices were not whispers. They were screams. 1,000 screams layered into words, echoing through marrow and memory. There is no outside. There is no forward. There is only deeper. The black within the arch pulsed as if inhaling, pulling light, warmth, meaning into itself. The walls trembled, cracks spiderwebbed outward, stone groaning beneath pressure that was never meant to exist in this world. The floor beneath their feet shifted, not breaking but softening. Rachel looked down in horror to see her boots sinking, not into dirt, not into stone, but into something like mud. But it wasn't mud. It was hands, hundreds of them, fingers, pale, thin, writhing just beneath the surface, gripping her ankles, her calves, pulling with strength far beyond what bone should hold. Samuel screamed, trying to yank her free, but his own feet sank too. The surface of the arch began to distort wildly now, bulging outward, as if whatever had been waiting for them was done waiting. "Stay, stay, stay," Rachel thrashed, her arms flailing as her legs sank deeper into the grasping mire of hands. Her breath came in ragged gasps, mixing with Samuel's desperate cries. Every time she tried to pull free, the fingers only gripped tighter, cold, impossibly strong, tugging with the mechanical precision of something that had done this 1,000 times before. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for anything, Anything. That wasn't collapse, wasn't surrender. Samuel fought harder, grabbing Rachel under the arms, yanking with everything he had, even as the fingers climbed up his own legs, knees, thighs, clamping down like the jaws of some predatory machine. His voice cracked into a scream. Let her go. But his words meant nothing here. Language didn't matter. Only presence. Only being. The thing in the arch trembled, its surface fracturing now, not like glass, but like memory splintering, shredding into pieces too small to hold. The hands dragged them lower, calf deep, then knee deep. The floor around them began to split, seams of light, or was it darkness, crawling outward like veins, like roots, threading through the ground, feeding something larger. And all the while, that chorus rose higher, louder, folding over itself in waves of static and bone-shaking sound. You found the way. The way found you. You are the door now. Rachel's eyes burned, her hands shaking as she fumbled for the Bible, her last tether, her last weapon, her last anything. And for a fraction of a second, the thing responded. Its surface recoiled. Its reflection stuttered. Elijah's face flickered across it again, broken, screaming, reaching. Don't let it finish what it started, his voice ragged, barely holding form. And then the surface twisted again, folding back into pure, pulsing void. Summoning every shred of strength, Rachel hurled the Bible at the base of the arch. The moment it struck, reality buckled. A shock wave blasted outward. The wall cracked. The ceiling shuddered. The hands gripping them spasmed, convulsed, releasing for a split second. Samuel didn't wait. He grabbed Rachel and surged forward. Not toward the arch, not toward the thing, but toward the narrow gap that had opened along a fractured wall behind them, a gap that hadn't existed a second before, a gap that looked just wide enough. Samuel's shoulder slammed into the jagged stone, forcing the crack wider as he shoved Rachel through first. Her fingers scraped against the rough edges, tearing skin, but she didn't care. Survival drowned pain. Behind them, the chorus of voices shattered into something far worse, screeching, a noise that didn't belong in lungs, didn't belong in the living. It was the raw sound of something realizing its prey was slipping free, something not accustomed to failure. The walls trembled violently. The ground buckled, splitting wider, sending chunks of rock collapsing into the writhing pit of hands below. As Samuel scrambled through the opening, one of the hands shot upward, grazing his ankle, nails like ice-cold needles, but he kicked hard, snapping the fragile fingers back. The passage behind them groaned as the fracture started to close. Not like stone settling, but like flesh stitching itself shut. They crawled, hands, knees, elbows, through the suffocating, narrowing tunnel. Each inch felt like pushing against the inside of a lung. The walls weren't rock anymore. They were warm, pulsing slightly, damp. Each breath carried the stink of copper, salt, and something sweet, like decay wearing perfume. Behind them, the screech warped back into whispers, lower now, more deliberate. You're still in the way, you can't leave the way. It followed not as a presence, but as a concept, gnawing at the edges of their thoughts. Rachel's knee hit something solid, wood. Her hands flew forward, searching blindly, and found it. A hatch, a splintered handle, a draft of air, real air, poured from the cracks. Light, faint, flickering. Samuel, help me. Her voice was raw, her throat burned from screaming, from breathing the unbreathable. Samuel lunged beside her, both hands gripping the frame, yanking, slamming shoulders into it, until the warped wood snapped free. The hatch flew open. Cold night air crashed over them, the first real air in what felt like years. Stars. The smell of wet leaves. Distant wind. They scrambled out, tumbling on a forest ground. Mud, roots, broken branches, coughing, gasping. But as Rachel spun around, ready to slam the hatch shut, there was nothing. No door. No frame. Just damp earth. A pile of collapsed roots. The hatch was gone. The entrance that had consumed them, the door to the way, had sealed itself, as though it had never been there at all. For several moments, neither of them moved. They lay sprawled in the mud, staring up at the night sky, chests heaving as lungs relearned how to breathe something that wasn't saturated with dread. Samuel turned his head slowly, his face pale, streaked with blood and dirt. "Rachel, are we out?" His voice was hoarse, fragile, afraid to believe the answer. Rachel pushed herself to sitting, her hands digging into the cold earth as if grounding herself to something. Anything real. Her gaze swept the trees. The forest was familiar. Not warped. Not twisted. No symbols carved into the bark. No impossible archways or pulsing walls. Just trees. Just stars. Silence. Beautiful, deafening silence. But even as her body told her she was safe, her mind whispered otherwise. She reached instinctively for the Bible, but her hands closed around nothing. Gone. Her chest clenched. Part of her wanted to sob. Part of her wasn't surprised. It didn't belong here. It never had. Maybe it never existed at all outside of that place. Or maybe it was still there, swallowed, like everything else. Her eyes darted to the ground where the hatch had been. Nothing. Only earth, smooth as if untouched for decades. Or centuries. Then Samuel's breath caught. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Rachel, look!" His voice cracked. Slowly, hesitantly, she followed his gaze. A tree, thick, old, stood a few feet away. On its trunk, a mark. Faint, weathered by rain time, but unmistakable. A spiral. Inside it, a cross. The same symbol Elijah had drawn. The same that had marked the map. The same that led them down. Rachel's throat tightened. Her voice broke into a whisper. "It's not gone. It's never really gone." The realization hit harder than any scream from the void. Whatever the way was, it didn't live underground. It didn't hide in tunnels. It wasn't a place. It was a pattern, a presence, a truth stitched into the fabric of the world. And once you've seen it, once it's seen you, the way is everywhere. Rachel stared at the spiral, her breathing uneven, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might crack her ribs from the inside. Her mind raced, clawing for explanations, rationality, but there was none. The symbol wasn't just a carving. It was a wound in reality, a scar left behind, marking where the fabric had been pulled thin. Her fingers hovered over it but couldn't touch. Every instinct screamed not to, not because it would hurt, but because it might respond. Samuel slowly stood, wiping dirt and blood from his hands as he scanned the woods like a hunted animal. "We left. Rachel, we're out. It can't follow here." His voice faltered on the last word, because even as it left his lips, they both knew it wasn't true. The line between there and here had blurred the moment they crossed into that hollow beneath the earth. There were no doors anymore, no barriers, only thin places. And now, they knew exactly how to find them. Or worse, how they found you. A sound in the distance made them both flinch, a branch snapping. Just wind. An animal. But the silence that followed was too thick, too intentional. Samuel's hand instinctively moved toward where his hatchet had been. But it was gone. Left behind. Swallowed by that place. His trembling fingers curled into fists instead. But even that felt laughably small against the kind of wrongness they had touched. Rachel tore her eyes from the spiral and scanned the forest line. The path back. She recognized it now, barely. The slope of the hill. The fork in the trail. They were close. Close to where the car was. Close to the edge of the woods. But every step forward now felt like walking a tightrope stretched between two realities. One foot in the world they thought they knew, the other still brushing against the underside of something else entirely. Something that doesn't forget. As they stepped away from the tree, the wind shifted. And in that wind, not loud, not forceful, but so subtle it could almost be imagined a voice. Their own voices. Whispered back to them. "You left, but you never really left, did you?" The trees stood still. The air held its breath. And in that perfect, suffocating silence, both of them realized the most horrifying truth of all. The way out is never really out. It's just further away. For now. They walked. Not fast. Not running. But with the weight of people who understood now that speed didn't matter. That you couldn't outrun something that isn't chasing you in miles, but in memory. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself was thicker, like the world was considering whether or not to let them go, whether to close the door behind them, or to open another, somewhere else, some other time. When the car came into view, half covered in fallen leaves, sitting beneath a skeletal canopy, Rachel's knees nearly buckled. It was still there. Real. Solid. Untouched. Samuel yanked the keys from his pocket with shaking hands, fumbling them so badly they fell into the dirt twice. Get in. His voice was thin, brittle, barely more than breath. The doors slammed shut. The engine roared to life. But the moment the headlights cut through the trees, Rachel gasped. Shapes. For a split second, maybe less, figures stood in the tree line. Tall. Still. Watching. Not moving. Not advancing. Just observing. Then, as fast as they were seen, they were gone. Nothing but shadows. Or maybe they were never there at all. But Rachel knew. Samuel knew. They had been. As the car jolted forward, tires skidding against gravel and mud, Rachel's fingers trembled over her lap. Her eyes darted toward the glove box, not knowing why, and without thinking, she popped it open. Inside, something slid forward. Her heart stopped. It was the Bible. The Bible. Water-damaged. Warped. Its cover cracked like dry skin. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. And yet, it was there. Samuel didn't see it. His eyes were locked on the road ahead, knuckles white on the wheel, whispering to himself over and over, "Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back." And as the forest disappeared behind them, swallowed by the night, Rachel held the Bible to her chest. Her hand brushed against the cracked leather cover, and her fingertips froze. Etched into the spine, now, a word that hadn't been there before. A word pressed so deeply into the material, it had split the leather open. Deeper. As the car sped away from the forest, swallowed by the winding roads and the safety of streetlights, the weight of what had happened didn't fade. It grew heavier, because the truth wasn't left behind. It wasn't buried beneath that hatch. It wasn't sealed within the twisted halls of whatever existed beneath the earth. The truth had followed them, not as a shadow, not as something visible, but as a knowing, a fracture, a terrible understanding that once you've seen the seams in reality, you never unsee them. Rachel's fingers traced the word burned into the spine of the Bible, deeper. Her mind replayed every step, every sound, every whisper that had led them there. And it became devastatingly clear. The greatest horrors aren't the things that hide from us. It's the things hiding in plain sight, beneath the floorboards of what we call reality. Waiting, watching, patient, not hunting, not chasing, because it doesn't need to. The way doesn't find everyone, but when it does, it never truly lets go. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most terrifying part, that it doesn't force you. It doesn't drag you. It invites. It waits. All it asks is curiosity. All it requires is a single, terrible question whispered into the back of your mind when the world feels just a little too quiet. What if there's more? And once you ask, the answer waits. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere you were never meant to go, but somewhere you now know exists. So if you ever find yourself wandering where the path feels wrong, where the air shifts, where the silence feels watched, trust the dread crawling up your spine. Because maybe, just maybe, the way is watching you back. And remember, not all doors open outward. Some open in, and some never close at all. If this story made you question the thin lines between what's real and what waits just beyond it, you're not alone. Share your thoughts below. Maybe someone else needs to hear them. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the darkest corners of the unseen. And stay curious, but not too curious. Because sometimes curiosity doesn't just lead you forward. Sometimes it leads you deeper,